On our lone headline tonight in this edition of the 6 p.m. primetime newscast on Equinoxe television, human rights being observed amidst cases of injustice, absence of press freedom and inequality in the country. A human rights lawyer is going to be telling us in the second part of this newscast that the government should respect the rights of the English-speaking population in Cameroon by engaging a genuine and inclusive dialogue. Our guest tonight is Barrister AGBOR BALLA. We shall be right back with the details. Stay with us. Good evening to you, ladies and gentlemen. We welcome you back from the weekend. You are watching the 6 p.m. primetime newscast on Equinoxe television. Let's begin right away in the southwest region of Cameroon, where the people of the northwest and the southwest regions have observed the Human Rights Day indoors. Human rights defenders have described the situation as total violation of their rights to movement. It is a similar scenario in the night where movement of persons and vehicles are restricted. The decision has been going on, which was put in place by the government or local administrative authorities. It has been going on for more than 1 year now. As Sila indicated, it has been going on for 2 years now, rather, since the escalation of the Anglophone crisis. On this Human Rights Day, the 70th of its kind, human rights advocates have launched a call for the government of Cameroon to resolve the deepening crisis in the northwest and the southwest regions of Cameroon, so as to minimize the growing humanitarian crisis. This Monday, Boya, Kumbalimbe, as we saw on the images, Mutengene, Bamenda, Manfe, Munya, Ekondo, Titi, and other towns and villages in the two Anglophone regions of Cameroon were practically shut down. Markets were shut down and the roads were simply deserted. Youths in the southwest region of the country, precisely in Boya, have said that their basic human rights laws are not respected in the country. Speaking on the sidelines of the 70th edition of the Human Rights Day, they said that there is no justice, freedom of expression and access to education, amongst others, which according to them are some of the key human rights values that are supposed to be respected by the government of Cameroon. Derek Jato tells us more from Boya.
As the world commemorates the 2018 edition of the International Day of Human Rights, some university students in Boya, the southwest regional capital, say what has been present around them has been the absence of human rights.
Due to this crisis, we see many children not going to school.
I would say that justice is not actually practiced well, but if we try to come together to work it out, then we shall make a better tomorrow and see how justice can be practiced perfectly in our country.
People now look at human rights as a toothless bulldog that they bark but they cannot bite. But we say no, because people have to stand for their rights and demonstrate it to the society.
And the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa, with the Cameroon headquarters in Boya subdivision, is observing the 2018 edition of the Human Rights Day on the campus of the University of Boya with law students, during which its founder and president, Barrister AGBOR BALLA Felix, brought in motivational speakers, and amongst them, Barrister Michel Ndoki.
And we need role models, we need those who can articulate, those who are activists, those who are practitioners to talk. So that's why we brought Barrister Ndoki to talk to the students, to motivate and inspire some of the students, to act as a role model for some of them and future generations.
The International Human Rights Day is celebrated every December 10. But this day was observed in Boya on December 8 because of the Anglophone crisis.
Well, we're celebrating International Human Rights Day, which is supposed to be on the 10th, but because of the ghost town we have in the southwest, we could not do it. And what better platform than to celebrate it with your students, than to celebrate it with students who are very devoted and who are very dedicated.
The region is at war for 2 years now running, and the fighters on the ground, the Ambazonian Defense Forces, have imposed Mondays as a day for sit-in strike in Anglophone Cameroon.
And the National Commission on Human Rights and Freedoms is as well preoccupied about the situation of human rights in Cameroon and in the northwest and the southwest regions of Cameroon, to be more precise. Chemuta Divine Banda, the president of the National Commission on Human Rights and Freedoms, told the press in Yaoundé that was few days ago that there is need for the situation in the northwest and the southwest regions of the country to return to normalcy, where people would be able to live their lives normally without fear. Let's hear him in the following excerpt. He's also going to be talking about the disarmament committee that was put in place by the government a few days ago.
The most important for all Cameroonians and for this commission I think it's a return to a state of normalcy. Returning to a state of normalcy where people live without fear of being attacked at any moment. There are parts of this country in which there is rampant killing, there's warfare going on, and we only pray that the call for disarmament could be, and the practice of that disarmament could be effective. And concerning that disarmament, the mobilization and rehabilitation, we think that if that disarmament, demobilization, and rehabilitation is done in a spirit of reconciliation, that will be good. In the spirit of reconciliation will be seen if those who obey the call and come back are treated the way that we've heard leading authorities saying that when they come back they will be treated properly, they will be protected, they will not be harassed. And if it is done in that spirit of reconciliation, then we think that the criticisms of concerning timing, concerning sequencing, whether we should come before what, does not really matter. If people cooperate and will come back to a state of normalcy, that will be good for everybody.
And about the situation of human rights in the country, U.S. senators are equally not indifferent. The United States senators have promised to impose additional conditions on the U.S. security assistance to Cameroon following reports of what they have so far qualified as gross human rights violations. This is contained in a letter addressed to the U.S. Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. Let's have the details of the report with Mfomi Armstrong Sanda.
In a letter signed by a group of Democratic senators to the United States Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, the American lawmakers raised deep concerns about the violations of human rights, the breakdown in the rule of law, and election frauds in Cameroon. The senators say rising tension in the Anglophone Northwest and Southwest regions, coupled with credible reports of human rights abuses by the Cameroonian armed forces in the English-speaking regions of the country and the Far North region, where Boko Haram is active, have changed the tune of discussions regarding United States security assistance to Cameroon. They continue by highlighting reports which indicates that the government forces are responsible for extrajudicial killings, burning of villages, torture, and other human rights abuses, including a much publicized video reportedly showing soldiers executing 2 women, a child and a baby they accused of being members of Boko Haram. The violent death of American missionary Charles Wesco, according to the U.S. senators, underscores the level of bloodshed engulfing the Anglophone regions of Cameroon. They also stated United Nations figures, which indicates that more than 21,000 Cameroonians have fled to neighboring countries and 160,000 are internally displaced. The group of senators closed their letter by urging the United States government to make it clear to the Cameroonian government that the U.S. commitment to human rights and the rule of law is steadfast. Hence, regional partners must share the commitment. The United States senators emphasized the critical importance of a political solution to the Anglophone crisis and also called on the government of Donald Trump to impose sanctions on individuals found to have committed gross violations of human rights consistent with the law. They also promised to work with other colleagues in the Senate to assess whether additional conditions should be imposed on the United States security assistance to Cameroon.
And in the second part of this newscast, our guest, NKONGHO Felix AGBOR BALLA, says that the government of Cameroon can only boast of human rights when it comes to signed conventions and laws. He equally indicated that the much talked about dialogue should be immediate, inclusive, and genuine. He would be talking to us in the second part of this newscast. Now, over 4,000 students have graduated from the University of Bamenda, in the Northwest region of Cameroon. The event that was placed under the auspices of the governor of the Northwest Southwest region, Adolf-Lily Lafrique, began in a very tense atmosphere, as NKONGHO tells us in the following report.
It is a Saturday in Bamenda, chief town of the northwest region of Cameroon. The street heading to the campus of the University of Bamenda is less busier, even though the institution is preparing to graduate its 8th batch of students. Student residential areas deserted due to threats received from unknown persons. Later, some courageous graduating students are spotted heading to the ceremonial ground alongside their parents. And security was also beefed up at all major roundabouts and roads leading to the campus of Bambili. It was under tight security that Governor Adolf-Lily Lafrique of the Northwest region shared the graduation ceremony of the University of Bamenda Saturday. The event was peculiar this year because the University of Bamenda sent out pioneer graduates from some faculties and departments. The Faculty of Health Sciences, for instance, sent out 62 medical doctors, with the best graduating students coming from the Department of Medical Laboratory, Kinyu Tatiana, with a GPA of 3.75 on 4. She got the Regina Mundi Leadership Prize. The university's Vice Chancellor was a happy lady.
We really feel proud that these students were able to brave it in spite of all the challenges, to have made it, and you have heard them. Their cumulative grade point averages are really fantastic.
Over 100 master's degree holders also graduated out from the Faculty of Arts.
I come here to reflect bearers of the spirit of the Bamenda University, all about working places in the nation, to spirit over both those that are going to work in the public services and in the private service.
The 8th convocation ceremony of the University of Bamenda saw 5,327 students passing out of the university.
We now talk about a war of words between two former players of the Indomitable Lions of Cameroon. It is happening on the social media. Former goalkeeper Joseph Bell-Antoine has claimed that Samuel Eto'o proposed to give him the position of the National Technical Director if he abandons his ambition to run for FECAFOOT's presidency. In retaliation, Eto'o has said that Joseph Antoine was not telling the truth. NKONGHO once more tells us more.
Bell-Antoine was the first to hit on former Indomitable Lions captain Samuel Eto'o during a debate program on a local television station. According to the former keeper of Cameroon, Samuel Eto'o had asked him to withdraw his candidacy from running for the position of the FECAFOOT president because the government doesn't want him to control that office. He added by saying that Samuel Eto'o had proposed to him the position of the National Technical Director of Football in the country. Shocked by the reaction of Joseph Bell-Antoine, Samuel Eto'o was quick to respond via his Twitter page, saying it is an unfounded declaration that makes him feel sad, stating that it was his father, Bell-Antoine, who had requested for him to help him get the position, and even making suggestions about the amount he should be paid if appointed. In another outing on Instagram, Samuel Eto'o published an SMS which he had received from Joseph Antoine Bell, soliciting for the position of the National Technical Director of Football with a whopping salary of 12 million francs CFA and the responsibility for him to appoint coaches of the national football teams. The appointment as a National Technical Director in football was supposed to come in the early days of December. This to stop Antoine Bell from aspiring into the position of the FECAFOOT presidency. After the night of December 9, 2018, with several reactions on the declaration of the two former Lions, December 10, 2018 was another day as Joseph Antoine Bell said Talks were on the way for him to withdraw his candidacy from running into the Fecafoot presidency. Affair Aswif.
And could that make Omar the ambitions of Joseph Antoine Bell to become president of the Cameroonian Football Federation? The answer would only be known on Wednesday when the election finally takes place. 7 candidates are on the list. They're bringing us to the end of this edition of the first segment of the news radar. Up next is Talking Points. Stay with us. We shall be right back. December 10th is observed as Human Rights Day across the globe, and today a human rights lawyer who is Vice President of the African Bar Association is equally founder CEO of the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa, Barrister NKONGHO Felix AGBOR BALLA, is our guest tonight. Good evening to you, Barrister. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Good evening, Mimi. Thanks for having me in the studio.
We should be thanking you for coming. We are going to begin right with taking a look at the strides made so far by Cameroon as far as human rights is concerned, or in the domain of human rights. Is Cameroon advancing or regressing, Barrister?
Well, that's a very interesting question. As we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was signed on 10 December 1948, and which is the Human Rights Day, with the theme Stand Up for Human Rights. Stand up against injustices, stand up for equality, and stand up for human dignity. If we look at this from the premise, Cameroon has made some strides in terms of ratifying international human rights treaties and agreements. But in its implementation, there is a lot that has to be done. But let us accept also that progress has been made. If you look at the 90s, from the 90s till today, we've made some progress, but there's a lot that has to be done, especially in implementation. When you look at freedom of expression and assembly, it's an area where Cameroon is lagging behind, wherein they try to violate the rights of people to freely express themselves, to assembly, especially when their views are contrary to the views of government. So in that case, government still has a lot to play. If you look at arbitrary detention, you look at extrajudicial killings, you would clearly say that the government doesn't respect the basic tenets of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights, in the constitution of the country. So in terms of implementation of human rights, Cameroon has a lot to do. In terms of ratification, they are doing so well.
So it's more on paper
it's
than
more,
in practice.
It's more cosmetic. I describe it as to probably bamboozle the international community, to show to the international community that, oh, they have ratified certain treaty. I remember when we went to the Human Rights Council in Geneva, Cameroon was represented by the Minister of External Relations. He talked about what they have done in terms of the treaties. But from my point that I was like, no.
We're supposed to be looking at
talking about the implementation, not just signing. Some of these treaties are not worth the salt if they are not implemented. If the government doesn't put measures in place to respect it, CEDAW, for example, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, we have, but how do we implement it? Can we really proudly say as a nation that we have succeeded in eliminating discrimination against women? No. Can we say we are protecting human rights defenders? No. Can we really say the right to free and fair elections takes place in this country? No. What we saw a few months ago was just a farce. To me, it was ridiculous. So we are still a long way to go in terms of implementation of human rights treaties.
As a human rights lawyer, you are president of the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Africa, like I said earlier. You've made series of reports with regards to the situation of human rights in Cameroon. Tell us more about the situation of human rights in Cameroon, especially in the conflicted northwest and the southwest regions of the country. What are some of the cases of human rights violations that you've been able to identify so far?
We've identified lots of them, but I'll give you an example of extrajudicial killings, for example. The way young men especially are killed, without any form of due process, any form of justice. Just the way somebody dresses, the person is shot. And this is coming from trained military who they know the Geneva Conventions, they know humanitarian law, they know that any civilian who is not taking any part in active hostility should not be a target. We look at the way villages and houses have been burned. We've documented close to 160 villages. In international criminal law, they would say that's terrorizing the civilian population, which amounts to a war crime and a crime against humanity. We look at the number of people who have been arrested. close to 1,000 have been arrested. Some of them are not even involved in the crisis. Somebody leaves his or her house to go and buy vegetable, for example, being at the wrong place at the wrong time, for example, the person is arrested. The way people have been sent out of their homes, you know, these IDPs, this refugee situation, you know, and also the fact that people cannot freely express themselves. People cannot ask for an authorization to hold a meeting to discuss the form of a state. That flies in the face of logic of the right to freedom of assembly and freedom of expression. So there are myriad of human rights violations taking place. It's true that also the armed separatists, they too are committing human rights violations. Okay, it's not just government, but I think government is a principal perpetrator, and we need to find a way to ensure that there's accountability, because human rights violations thrive in an environment of accountability, and this is what is happening. The forces of law and order who have committed some of these heinous crimes.
But how would the accountability be when this crisis is highly underreported? Because we have the impression that, like you said, freedom of speech and expression is highly being suppressed. You see what journalists are going through on a daily basis. How would there be accountability when the crisis is underreported?
Yeah, this is one of the most underreported crises in the entire world. The human rights violations in Cameroon, in the southwest and northwest, is horrible. It's horrible. The number of people who have been killed, I don't think the international community is aware the extent of the damages that has been done and committed on the people. And yes, because government has something to hide, they don't want journalists to freely report. Reporting now would amount to terrorism, would amount to apology to the terrorists. So at the end of the day, they are trying to cover up what is happening. But we have documented cases that have been reported, cases where government itself had acknowledged the fact that the soldiers committed such violations, but we don't know when they are tried, because the perception of impunity is contributing to the violence in this country. When those who are fighting for the rights of people, those who are fighting for separation, or those who clamored for federation were arrested, the trial was made in public. Seseko Ayuk and others were brought to court the other day. We saw them. They are going to face...
So there should be justice on both sides.
That is it. That's so you don't just try Seseko Ayuk, Tabe, Eyambe, Tassan and Co, and then you try the others in camera. No. We have to, if there is supposed to be fairness, if there is supposed to be balance, we need to know also that they have been tried. We need to also know that they were taken to the principal prison in NKONGHO, or if they had said, we need to know.
Yeah, because we've had outings of the Ministry of Defense and the Minister of Communication indicating that those who've committed atrocities, I'm talking about on the side of the military, are going to be sanctioned accordingly. But like you said, it's unclear, even to the public and even to the media, how it happens.
We've not seen any military person who's been tried. You know, they tell us, and this is a government that has lost the legitimacy of the people. Nobody can believe what they say, because they are known for telling lies. They are known for manipulating public opinion to suit the position of the government. So nobody can believe them. So the best way for them to be believed is, let us see, let the trial be open. Let them allow human rights monitors, let them allow journalists to be there to follow the trial, because I don't see why there is, when so-called, is it those who are clamoring for separation, those who are clamoring for federation, those who are fighting against injustice and human rights are tried, and the trial is open. When it concerns the others, no. Justice
not the
has
same.
to
Now,
be fair.
Amnesty International has been issuing annual reports, but this year it is very, very particular. I'm talking about the case of Cameroon. In its human rights report for the year 2018, Amnesty International is lashing at the government on the situation or how the crisis is being managed in the northwest and the southwest regions of Cameroon. Amnesty International says that the government is trying to suppress the major revendication of the people. What do you think, Barrister?
Yeah, but Amnesty is not saying anything new. This is what we've been saying for close to 2 years. You know, the government is putting the cart before the horse. The government is not addressing the fundamental problems. The government is just trying to suppress. I describe what they are doing as very cosmetic measures, okay? They created the Disarmament Commission, they created Bilingual Commission, but that's not what the people want. The people want the government to address...
And the Human Rights Commission too is there.
Yes, the people want the government to address the fundamental issues. So the government thinks that they can buy time. You know, they still live in their 1960, 1970 mentality with the law of repression, IJO's 1962 law on terrorism. terrorism. They still believe that they can bully their way through, that they can use the barrel of the gun, but they have to win the minds and hearts of the people. And to win the minds and hearts of the people, you need to have a genuine dialogue. You need to accept the fact that government has made mistakes. You need to have, government has to apologize to the people for what they have done. So we sit down, I mean, the Cameroonians, each and everyone, even the separatists, sit down and try to have a veritable dialogue on the way forward. Without that, they'll be doing one cosmetic measure to the other, but it
Do
will
you
not
see
work.
this dialogue happening, Barrister? Many have been talking about dialogue and the need for the government to make sure that there is an inclusive and genuine dialogue as far as the Anglophone crisis is concerned. Do you see this dialogue taking place?
To be sincere with you, Mimi, this is a government that doesn't know how to dialogue. Okay, we have a history of not talking to the other person. This is a country that has hardly dialogue with its people. The belief that they can buy their way, they can bully their way, and they can achieve results. But this time, and as I said a long time ago, they would have to talk to the people. They would have to talk to the leaders. They would have to talk to those who are leading the struggle for us to come out from the crisis. Without talking to them, we will not have a solution. So the government has to come down from its high horse. The government has to swallow the bitter pill and acknowledge the fact that they made errors. They did not address the problems when it started, but it's still time for us to sit. It is still workable. It is still doable for us to find a solution. But we cannot find a solution when one party to the conflict decides the terms of the conflict. When one party of the conflict decides how the peace process has to go. No. These are two parties in a conflict. They have to consent. They have to seek the opinion of the other on how to go about it. Without that, I'm not very
The government has been putting in place series of measures to address the Anglophone crisis. You've talked about the Bilingualism Commission. Recently, we have the creation of the National Disarmament, Demobilization and Reintegration Committee, created once again by the government of Cameroon. But it's come under strong criticisms from some observers who hold that this cannot be possible at the time when some of the ringleaders, as far as the Ambazonian movement is concerned, are still behind bars. Barrister, tell us how far this committee can go with the current state of affairs in the two Anglophone regions of Cameroon and
the intention might be good, but the timing would be wrong. If I were government, what I would do to win the minds and hearts of people, I would ensure that about 1,000 people who are in jail, I would release them. Okay, for those the government will not want to release, I will ensure that they have a speedy and a fair trial. Then we'll grant general amnesty or clemency to everybody to start from a fresh start, to acknowledge that both parties might have made mistakes, and we move forward. Then the leaders of the various groupings now can at least help in ensuring that this disarmament commission goes as planned, works well. And I don't understand why we always have the same people. I mean, we could have somebody from the civil society. They could have had somebody from the clergy.
Neutral actors, like you, for instance.
Probably I
civil society.
I might not be seen. I think in the eyes of government, I'm not seen as a very neutral person. They associate me with the struggle, and I say yes, I'm a child of the struggle, a child of the revolution. But I think
one of the
founder. But I think that there are others who they could have gotten, for just the perception that they are ready for us to have a solution. But they use the same old tactics that has not been working. I don't really know.
But you seem to have a clearer picture of what this crisis is all about and how it can be properly managed. In few days from now, the government is expected to put in place a new government to run the affairs of the states. I mean, the appointment of ministers in the country. What if you're appointed? Are you going to accept, Barrister? Are you going to say yes?
I don't think I would accept.
Maybe you could be in a position where you can give better proposals or recommendations as far as the crisis is concerned.
The problem is not appointment. The problem is not appointing somebody who has to give him a big car, to give him a house, to give him security guards. The problem is, what effective power will that person have? Can the person really do the work that is assigned to do? Would the person have the guts to meet Mr. Biya? Because I really think that if they are to appoint you, the president has to meet you. And you have a one-on-one with him and tell him that, Mr. President, I'm ready to serve the state. But if I were to be appointed, this is what I'm
Do you think that government ministers today could do more than they are doing already?
Yeah, but because most of them...
In terms of proposing solutions to the crisis.
Yeah, but most of them probably decide to bribe their ways to be appointed. Most of them feel that it's a favor that they have done to them, so they cannot express their opinion.
Maybe you could make the difference.
Well, the government needs people who can look at them, look
like
at the president in his eyes, and tell him that, Mr. President, this is wrong. Okay, because nobody is infallible, and as I said during the Constitutional Council, this country is bigger than everybody. So if they need to build, they need to have people who can realistically help in building the country.
Finally,
who can find a solution.
Barrister, just briefly before we go, we are talking about the Human Rights Day that has been commemorated. If you were to give your last statements or last words from you, what would that be, Barrister?
My last word would be that let's stand up for human rights. Let's not only wait for the government for the protection and promotion of human rights. Us as individuals also, as individuals collectively, we can make the world a better place than we made it. We can also respect the rights of women. We just celebrated, today ends the 16-day activism against violence against women. In our own small world, in our houses, in our churches, in our communities, we should ensure that we stand up for human rights, we stand up against injustices, we stand up for equality, and we stand up for human dignity.
Thank you so much, Barrister, for joining us tonight on Talking Point. We hope to have you some other time again. Thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome.
That is the founder and CEO of the Center for Human Rights and Democracy. He's equally the Vice President of the African Bar Association, Barrister NKONGHO, Felix AGBOR BALLA. They're joining us tonight on Talking Point. That brings us to the end of this edition of the news. We thank you so much once again for joining us. Wishing you a blessed stay in the company of our programs. Until we meet again, goodbye.